Good afternoon again, and welcome to Bloomerang Academy, and thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Diana Otero. I am the Product Engagement Manager at Bloomerang. You might recognize me from attending some of our Bloomerang Academy classes or listening to our release and help videos. Today, we are talking about Bloomerang plus Zapier, everything you can do with Google Sheets. We've mentioned before that Zapier has integrations with over 2,000 different apps, and today we're going to be focusing on Google Sheets. I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Jeff Haguewood. Jeff is a Zapier certified expert and Bloomerang integrations consultant at Sidekick Solutions. Sidekick Solutions is a Bloomerang partner specializing in system automations for Bloomerang. Jeff has been a Bloomerang user since 2013 and most recently was part of the Bloomerang team that launched the Bloomerang Zapier app, which is a key component of today's webinar. We're so excited to have Jeff here today to share his expertise and explore how you can use the Bloomerang Zapier app with Google Sheets. Welcome, Jeff.
Great. Thank you, Diana. It's great to be here. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll make a transition here so I can share my screen. Great. We have a lot to cover today, and in my practice runs, we made it work, but we'll see where we get to today. It's an exciting opportunity to show you some examples of integrations with Google Sheets. So the goal of today's webinar is to show you some actionable use cases that you can implement between Bloomerang and Google Sheets. To start, we're going to look a little bit at Zapier and why Zapier is included in this presentation as a component of Google Sheets integration with Bloomerang. And the three use cases that we're going to look at today are lists and directories, dashboards, and constituent mass updates. We've got three really neat use cases that demonstrate Bloomerang automation with a spreadsheet, which is a really cool concept. As Diana mentioned, feel free to submit any questions during the presentation. We're going to take a couple of breaks and answer questions, and then I'm willing to stay on as long as needed to answer questions at the end. All right, let's dive in. So we're going to start with a quick poll and see how many are using Zapier and potentially how many of you are using Zapier with Bloomerang. Diana, you want to run that? There we go. Perfect. So a couple of choices. You can respond that you've never heard of Zapier before. You can tell us that you've used Zapier before, and we're really curious to see if any of you are using Zapier and Bloomerang together.
Thank you, everyone. It looks like so far we have 50% who this is their first time using or hearing about Zapier. We're excited to have you here and show you the possibilities of what you can do with it. We've also have about 44% of people who have heard of Zapier but haven't used it yet.
Okay.
And so far about 5% who use Zapier but not with Bloomerang, and only 2% who use Zapier with Bloomerang.
Awesome. Great. Well, let's go ahead and jump back into the presentation here. Well, I appreciate that feedback. And since we have a good majority of you that have not heard of Zapier or are new to this concept of Zapier, let's just do a high-level look at Zapier. And also let's take a look at why we think that it's an important feature for your Bloomerang system. So Diana mentioned earlier that we're going to send you a link on a prior Academy webinar that we hosted on Zapier and Bloomerang globally. So that'll give you some more information about how Zapier works and how it works with Bloomerang. Now you might be wondering why we're talking about Zapier when this is a presentation about Bloomerang and Google Sheets, and that's a fair question, and I think it probably is going to offer some exciting answers for you. Zapier is software that enables Bloomerang and Google Sheets integration. It's the middleware that sits between Bloomerang and Google Sheets, helping them talk to each other. So Zapier is automation software. It's an integration designer that helps you build integrations with blocks called triggers and actions. And with Zapier, you can build one or many integrations all within one platform. With Zapier, you can do a lot more than just Google Sheets. You can really automate hundreds of tasks around your Bloomerang system. So why should we get excited about Bloomerang Zapier integration, and even with respect to Google Sheets? So first and most important, Zapier connects with 2,000 other applications. Any apps in Zapier's directory can be connected to Bloomerang. If it's on Zapier's list, it can be integrated. And the list is available at a URL, zapier.com/apps. Any apps in this directory can be integrated with Bloomerang. So that's an exciting option. And you can see Google Sheets is right at the top of that list. Second, Zapier was designed for anyone to build integrations. You don't need to know how to code to build Zaps. Anyone can build and maintain a Zap. And today we're going to walk through some builds so you can get a feel for what that looks like. And then lastly, Zapier enables custom integrations. You aren't limited to one-size-fits-all workflows or mapping or formatting. You can actually build the integration that matches your use case, your workflow. And in talking about Google Sheets, flexibility is especially important because spreadsheets are flexible by nature. And we want to leverage that flexibility via an integration with Bloomerang. So with Bloomerang Zapier integration, you can build integrations with data flowing both out of Bloomerang to Google Sheets, and also build integrations with data flowing into Bloomerang from Google Sheets. So you can think of this like data entry in Bloomerang flows into a Google Sheet with that same data, or you could enter your data in a Google Sheet and that data could flow into Bloomerang. Let's dive right into some use cases. Our first use case is going to cover real-time lists and directories. Now, this is a great place to start because it's foundational to spreadsheet integration with Bloomerang. So really, any of the use cases we're going to talk about today starts with some form of list building in a spreadsheet. Now, it's important to note that any Zapier-enabled Bloomerang integration with Google Sheets will run in real time. So that means a Zap that is triggered when data is entered in Bloomerang is going to push to your Google spreadsheet immediately. So right out of the gate, you might also be asking, well, why would an organization want to automate the generation of a list or a directory in Google Sheets when I can just run a Bloomerang report? So that's a fair question. There's a couple of reasons why you might consider it. Maybe you want to give non-Bloomerang users access to some data without a login. You might want an up-to-date list in real time. It might be more efficient to have a real-time list instead of running a report. In addition, the list that you build in a Google spreadsheet could also be used for a dashboard or a mass update, which are the two use cases we're going to cover next. So let's look at two examples of real-time lists. So the first one that we're going to take a look at generates a list of new recurring donation schedules when they're created in Bloomerang. So for each new donation schedule that you create in Bloomerang, we're going to write the constituent's name and the schedule details to the Google spreadsheet. So this might be useful if you want a list of your recurring donors, or you want to know which schedules are active. So let's actually dive into Zapier and Google Sheets and take a look at how this is done. So the first step in designing any integration with Google Sheets is that we need to add the column headers that represent the data we want to write to the spreadsheet. So I've actually already set up this spreadsheet on a tab. This is our new recurring donation schedule. And you can see I've added a number of headers for the data that we want to map into this sheet. Account number, name, start date of the schedule, the installment amount, fund, campaign, and appeal. And you can add all sorts of other data. So if you want to add more constituent information, or you want to add more information from the transaction, you're welcome to do that, and I'll show you how that's done. Once your spreadsheet is in place, then we're going to jump into Zapier. The first thing that you're going to do is you're going to make a Zap. So you're going to click this button. And the first step of any Zap is a trigger. This is what starts a workflow. A trigger is an event that happens in one app that starts a Zap to run in Zapier. So in this case, I want my trigger to be Bloomerang because I want a transaction coming from Bloomerang. So I'm going to choose Bloomerang. And I'm going to select new transaction as my trigger because of the options available in Bloomerang, this best describes my need to get a recurring donation schedule. This triggers when a new transaction is created in Bloomerang. I'll click continue. I'll authenticate with Bloomerang. And now I can customize what types of transactions I want to come through this trigger. We only want to trigger on recurring donation schedules, so I'm going to customize it by selecting only the type recurring donation schedule. I'm not going to worry about a minimum or a maximum amount. And in this case, I don't need the constituents' cumulative giving history or their household information. So I'm just going to click continue. And the next step is to bring in some sample data. So as you build a Zap, you want to bring in a sample set of data that illustrates the use case that you're trying to build. So I'm going to test the trigger. And this is going to bring in some sample recurring donation schedules. So this data looks pretty good. You can see this is type as a recurring donation. You can see there's a bunch of data coming through from Bloomerang, and this is available for us to build our integration. Now, these are only samples. These transactions are not going to run through our integration because Zapier is real time. Only transactions entered after the time we turn it on will actually run through the integration. So one of the things I want to look at here is I want to take a look at my my data and see how this data is formatted. So you'll notice that the recurring donation next installment date for a newly created recurring donation schedule is formatted as a timestamp. And I want the start date here in column C to be listed as month, day, year. So it appears that I need to do a transform on this field in order to populate it in the Google spreadsheet in this format. So I'm going to use this sample information. I'm going to click continue. And my next step of my Zap is actually going to be a formatter step. Now this is a little off the beaten path, but I think it's going to help clarify how you might build and transform data within a Zap. So this formatter step, what I'm going to do is I'm going to format the, let's see here, the recurring donation next installment date. That's a timestamp. And I'm pulling this from my sample data up here in the trigger. It's just like a word merge. And I'm going to change my to format to, let's say, where's my month, day, year? This right here, month, day, year. If I test that, you'll see that I'm converting now that timestamp date into a regular date. So now I'm ready to go into my Google spreadsheet. So I'm going to add an action for Google Sheets. I'm going to create a new spreadsheet row, select my account, choose my spreadsheet, choose the worksheet that I want to use, and this will populate my header columns as fields in Zapier. So now all I have to do is just map the data from the Bloomerang trigger into my spreadsheet. So I'll go ahead and just search constituent account number. So now I have that key populated. Name is full name. Now I have that key populated. Start date is going to come from my formatter step. Now I have that key populated. Installment amount, so on and so forth. Excuse me, it's an amount. There we go. And you would populate that for all of the fields that you have in your Google spreadsheet. So at this point, this Zap is ready to go. So you'd be done editing and we'd flip on our Zap with the on button. Now I already have a Zap built for this because I wanted to demonstrate it, how it actually works in real time. So I'm gonna go back to my screen here, and I actually have a Zap that we just built, already pre-built and turned on. It's sitting right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into Bloomerang and I'm just going to add a recurring donation schedule to the database. So let's make this a $10 recurring donation schedule. I'll add my fund. I'll add a campaign and appeal. We'll say the start date's today and the frequency is monthly. I'll save this record. And we'll wait for this to run. And you can see that record is now populated in the Google spreadsheet. Again, all happening in real time based on data entry that's happening in Bloomerang. So that's a pretty simple example. We can do that for constituents. We can do that for gifts. We can do that for all sorts of different types of information that you might want to take from Bloomerang into a Google spreadsheet. So let's look at a more complicated or more sophisticated workflow. Let's look at this one right here. This is an example of a giving circle. So this time what we want to do, and let me jump back here just to give some context. So let's say we want to add a constituent to a Google Sheet if they match the eligibility criteria for a giving circle. And in our giving circle, let's say it's lifetime revenue greater than $10,000. So let's say over the course of their entire Bloomerang timeline, they've given more than $10,000. They go into our giving circle. So we have a workflow here. And like our prior example, we need to start by setting up our Google spreadsheet. So I'm going to jump into our spreadsheet here. And you can see in this case, I have a little bit more data. I have some constituent information, their giving circle information, so when it started, the lifetime revenue to date. I have some contact information about them, as well as their household information. Now, the key part about this workflow is that if someone already has given $10,000 in the past, I don't want to create a new row of information in the spreadsheet. I want to update their lifetime revenue to reflect the new total. So this workflow here shows that we want to trigger on a new transaction in Bloomerang. We want to filter only if the lifetime revenue is greater than 10,000. Then we're going to find or create the constituent in the row. If it already exists, we're not going to create a new one. And if it does already exist, we're going to update the lifetime revenue number to the new number. All right, so I'm going to take a look at a pre-built Zap on this one. I'm not going to build it from scratch because this one has a little bit of density to it. But let's walk through each step. So the first step will be creating a trigger that is a new transaction in Bloomerang. I'm going to set a couple of filters on my trigger for donation, recurring donation payment, and pledge payment with a minimum amount greater than a penny. So why are we doing this? The lifetime revenue total will only adjust or only change if we add a revenue transaction greater than a penny to Bloomerang. if I add an in-kind gift or I add a pledge, that's not impacting the lifetime revenue number. So I'm going to filter those out so that I'm only triggering on new events that would impact this lifetime revenue number. Additionally, I'm going to include or flip the constituents' cumulative giving history to true, as well as their household information to true, because I need their lifetime revenue number, as well as their household details. So this, unlike the prior step where we decided not to include these two components, we will need these two components in later steps of our Zap. The next step in the workflow is to set up a filter. So we only want to include constituents in our giving circle if their cumulative giving lifetime is greater than, in this case, because of the operator, $9,999.99. What happens in Zapier is that if you do not pass this criteria, the Zap stops. If you do pass this criteria, then you would continue on to the next step in the workflow. And in this case, we are going to run a search. So we are going to choose Google Sheets. We're going to look up a spreadsheet row because we want to find out if that constituent is already in the giving circle. We're going to authenticate with our app. And then we're going to customize our spreadsheet. We chose the spreadsheet and the worksheet that we want to use. And we've set the lookup column to the account number. That's this column right here, column A. And we're using the constituent account number from the new transaction in Bloomerang. We're using that key as our lookup. So as new items come in from Bloomerang, we're looking up that constituent account number to see if it's already in our spreadsheet. If it is not in our spreadsheet, we're going to check this box to create a new row. So in this case, we're mapping in all of the data from Bloomerang, the account number, the full name, the membership start date, which is the date of the transaction, the lifetime revenue, and all of this is coming from the Bloomerang step prior. We're going to create that row. So let's take a step back and think about what this action in Zapier is doing. First, we're going to search to see if there's a row that already exists for this constituent. If it does, the Zap continues by finding that row. Let's say it's row 5. If it can't find a row, it's going to create a new one. So that way there's a new constituent in the giving circle. Now, what's interesting is that we can use the information on a found constituent to continue the Zap forward. So we can run a filter on if data was found, meaning there is a constituent in the row, and that's true. Then we want to update this same spreadsheet and the row that was found with the new lifetime giving total. So again, if Luke Skywalker comes back through and gives another donation, this system will look up this row and overwrite column D. Now we're also going to overwrite a bunch of other data like their primary contact information and household details, because we recognize that those might change as each donation flows through in Bloomerang. All right, so let's take a look at this in practice. So I'm going to take a look at Alfred here. So you'll notice that Alfred has a lifetime giving total of $6,250. Not quite in our giving circle yet. You can see he hasn't shown up in our giving circle. So I'm going to add a donation to Alfred's timeline for $5,000. And that's going to take our total above $9,999 and should add Alfred to this sheet. So I'm going to add a donation. Enter some data. Save the record. And you can see the row created with Alfred's new lifetime giving total. Now we can run that same principle again. Let's say we add a new donation to Alfred, let's say for $2,500. And we run this again. Oh no, we didn't update the lifetime revenue. I must have had my Zap built wrong. Well, that's embarrassing during a demo. We can go take a look at that. I don't want to get too hung up on it. But if we scroll down here and we take a look at the constituents giving total, make sure we update that with the appropriate information. It's what happens in live demos. Take a look at Alfred's total here. And we scroll down to the bottom. Interesting, the giving total is not updating with that new information. That is an interesting outcome. Well, we may have to go look at how the API is translating that. I had this working earlier this morning, so again, I apologize, but the intent of this this use case is to overwrite that lifetime giving total, but what I'm going to do is actually check and make sure that the API is updating that lifetime total. Sorry about that. Sorry we didn't get you a perfect example there. But the cumulative giving summary should update with that new lifetime revenue total each time.
Thanks, Jeff. Sometimes technology picks just the right moment.
That's right, all the time, every time. I swear, if I had a penny for every time that I did a demo where something didn't work exactly as planned, that would be the case. So again, in this case, the lifetime total should pick up, and we'll check on that to make sure that the API is writing that properly. Appreciate everyone's understanding there. So at this point, what I do want to do is I want to jump back into our slides, and I want to take a look at a poll and look at what scenarios do you find most valuable for lists and directories, and we have some options. So Diana, do you want to go ahead and put that up? And while we're doing that, if you want to throw a question my way, we can open up for some Q&A. Great. So here are some options. Be curious which options you think would be most valuable to you in a list directories scenario. And then Diana, do we have any questions that we might answer at this point?
Yes, thank you so much, Jeff. First of all, Lori says that this is wonderful. She loves all this. It's looking great. But she's wondering about the cost benefit because Zapier isn't included with a Bloomerang subscription. And while there is a free version of Zapier, some of these multi-step zaps could incur a cost. So can you talk a little bit about the cost benefit of automating something like this?
Sure. Yeah, so I think there's two ways that we look at integrations from our seat. And again, this is not how everyone looks at them, but I like to think about capabilities that you don't have now and also the time that you would save. So if this type of scenario, this type of integration gives you a capability you don't have, then the cost benefit analysis is related to capabilities that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get in your Bloomerang license or with another tool. And that then ports directly into time savings. If you're doing a giving circle, you could certainly run a report. However, if you need that in real time, let's say you're using the Google Sheet to then populate your website, or you're using that Google Sheet to notify members of your team to reach out to new Giving Circle members. Those things are things that might need to happen in real time and otherwise would save you time because you can go directly to the sheet instead of running that report in Bloomerang. I think we should also take a look at dashboards and constituent mass updates because those are two capabilities that greatly enhance Bloomerang functionality, and those might give you a better value proposition as well. So we certainly have 2 more use cases to go.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeff. And we're getting some results from our poll in. It looks like the majority we have 46% each are looking at major donors and donors or donations this month, followed closely by constituents based on custom fields.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for that feedback. So let's jump into the big one. And I think this is probably why most people have shown up today. And I think this is an exciting use case, is the ability to create a dashboard in Google Sheets. So you might want to consider a dashboard in Google Sheets if you want to visualize information or communicate key metrics. If you want to transform and analyze data using spreadsheet formulas. Maybe you want to run a formula that you can't quite get in Bloomerang reports, but you want a little bit more analytics power. You could go to a Google Sheet for that. Also, like with the prior example, maybe you need to make a report accessible to a non-Bloomerang user, and a dashboard's a great way to do that. In addition, this also gives you real-time reporting. So this is something you can check in real time and it will be constantly updated. So to demonstrate how a dashboard might work, we're going to look at a fund activity summary. So many of you are probably familiar with the campaign progress bar on your Bloomerang home screen. We're going to model that same progress bar in a Google spreadsheet using the fund field instead of campaign. Now, this dashboard, the concept that we're going to present, could also be used for appeals. It's not limited to just funds. It could also be used for custom fields on the transaction or even custom fields on a constituent profile. So no limits really to how you do this, but we're just going to make an analog of campaign progress to fund activity. So to create this dashboard, again, we're going to start in Google Sheets. And we're going to create 2 tabs. So the first tab is going to be a running list of all transactions. You can see I've got the account number, the name of the person, date, amount, transaction type, fund, campaign, and appeal. And this sheet is going to populate a dashboard sheet that includes our visualization and our aggregate information. So the integration itself is very straightforward. It's really 2 steps: new transaction in Bloomerang, right to the Google Sheet. We're then using the power of Google Sheets, using this raw data set to populate a dashboard. So like our prior examples, we're going to bring in some common information: name, date, transaction amount, fund, campaign, appeal. And then we're going to go to Zapier and build our Zap. So like with prior examples, I already have a Zap that's pre-built. And so I am going to open this up. And this is a very simple 2-step Zap. In fact, Lori, going back to your question, a 2-step Zap could be something that you could build using the free version of Zapier. Now, more complicated workflows would require a paid plan. However, this 2-step Zap could be used with the free plan within some certain limits. So my trigger is going to be a new transaction in Bloomerang, and I'm going to pick donations, pledges, and recurring donation payments because I want to use my dashboard based on a raised total. I'm going to set my minimum amount to a penny. I'm not going to include the constituents' giving history or the household information because I just need the transaction data. In fact, I really don't even need the name of the constituent, but the transaction data is our key. We'll run a sample to get some sample example information into our Zap, and then we're going to build an action, create spreadsheet row in Google Sheets, create spreadsheet row for our spreadsheet on our tab number 2 fund activity transaction list. And then we're going to map all of this data from Bloomerang. Again, same principle, just like a word merge. We're going to select the field keys that model into our Google spreadsheet. So once I've got that all set, I'll go ahead and flip it on. And just so we can watch these transactions come in, you can see I've had this Zap running, so the transactions we were entering earlier already came through. But let's go ahead and jump in and let's go to a constituent record, and we'll create a donation to the unrestricted fund. So first, what I want to show is the addition of this transaction. So we'll add $10 unrestricted. And you can see that transaction is added to the bottom of my raw data set. Now let's jump into how our Google Sheet is formatted. So I have all sorts of calculations set up to run on that raw data set. So you'll see I have my raised totals, which are driven off, or my raised totals and my number of donations, and those are driven off of my raw data set over here. I have a goal, which is just a number. And I have a net to go, which is the difference between my goal and my raised amount. And that's what creates this progressive bar. So let's take a look at the formulas and how you might build this. Now, there's lots of ways to build dashboards and plenty of formulas to use, and you're welcome to approach these however you'd like. But the way that we're going to do this is we're going to drive it off of this raw data set, and in the raised bucket, what we're doing is we're summing all of the transactions where the fund is unrestricted. Now, all of these formulas, I'm not going to go to them in great detail. All these formulas, if you'd like to use them, are going to be in the slide deck. So we've got them all laid out for you. Because I know there's quite a bit of detail to cover in just a short session like today. But what we're doing is we're saying sum the amount of all of the transactions in this sheet where the fund is unrestricted. That's that formula. The net to go is simply a difference, a subtraction of the goal minus the raised amount. And then the progress towards the goal is actually the that's better is actually the raised divided by the goal amount, which gives us our progress towards the goal. So let's actually watch this happen in real time, and we can take a look at how this works. So let me move this a little bit to the right here. So let's do something big that really moves this bar. So let's add $1,000 donation to the unrestricted fund. And you can see that my total updated to $3,732. Let's do the same thing with the restricted fund. Let's just add a $1,500 donation. Actually, let's just add it to the general operating here. We'll go over our amount. Slight delay. And now you can see that we're over our amount. We've exceeded our total. And you'll notice that this sheet automatically updates, again, driven off of this raw data set that we have going on a separate tab. All sorts of formulas and calculations you can build into these sheets to cover different types of use cases. Really, the sky's the limit in terms of how you put these together. So I'm sure that there are lots of questions about dashboards. So Diana, why don't we go ahead and see if there are any questions before we move on to constituent mass updates.
Thanks, Jeff. We're already getting a lot of interest, and a lot of people, we have some concerns that these look great, but people don't have necessarily the experience or the tech savviness to set all of this up. Is this something that you would be able to help with, or your team, in terms of consulting services?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want this to totally be a plug. I hope that some of these use cases you can apply them certainly with the recording and the slides and other things. But yes, there are plenty of sophisticated workflows that we can support in building for organizations. I'm sure also that there's probably a question, I can just imagine it. I haven't looked at the questions list, but I'm sure there are people out there wondering about Excel. Has that come up a couple times?
Yes. Is it possible to use this, is this possible to use this with Excel, or to convert Excel to Google Sheets to be able to use this?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Excel 365, a business plan of Microsoft Office 365, is an app in the Zapier marketplace, and you can use Excel in place of Google Sheets. Now, we have found some limitations with Excel in some of these use cases, but that does not mean you can't use it. Our preference is Google Sheets. We're a G Suite company. We use G Suite internally and are very familiar with Google Sheets, and it offers a lot of flexibility. And G Sheets was always a native web app to begin with. So we're big advocates of Google Sheets, but you can use all of these same principles with Excel. In fact, if I jump over here, you'll notice that Excel is an app in the Zapier marketplace and includes many of the same triggers and actions that are available with Google Sheets. So maybe we should do a Microsoft Excel webinar at some point in the future.
Yeah, let us know in the chat if that's something that you would be interested in, and that's something we can take a look at. We also have a question here for, do we have templates for some of these things that we're showing today?
Great question. They beat us to the punch because we've got that at the end of the webinar, but there are templates for Bloomerang and Google Sheets. If you go to zapier.com/apps, Bloomerang, and then integrations. In fact, why don't I go ahead and just put that in the chat here since we're live. There's the chat. There's the chat. And all panelists, attendees. Yep, there you go. We have a number of templates ready to go. You can click the try it button to load those into your Zapier account. Once you authenticate with your Google Sheets and Bloomerang accounts, you're ready to go. These are a great place to start. Again, I was going to talk about this a little bit later, but might as well do it now. Boot up a template, customize it as you need, and turn it on and see how it runs. There's really no harm to turning these on because integrations are only one at a time. They're only happening per item that you enter in Bloomerang or per item you enter in a sheet. So if you don't like how the integration's running, you just turn it off. Edit it and then turn it back on.
Great. Thank you, Jeff.
Perfect. So we've got about 12 minutes. I want to hit constituent mass updates because I think this is going to come up as a use case for a lot of people. Data quality cleanup and updating custom fields on constituents can be a pain, especially if you have to go account by account in Bloomerang and navigate through each of those accounts to make the change. So we can actually use Google Sheets as an updating tool, a batch updating tool, to update constituent details, whether that's naming fields or custom fields. We can use Google Sheets to edit and update that information. So your organization might want to think about mass updates to save time on cleanup. You can assign custom fields. You can update constituent coding in batch. And you can also, to a certain extent, with some limitations, you basically get data entry in a spreadsheet. This is not always especially if you're creating new constituents, it's not always a replacement for the import tool, but there's certainly some use cases where this can support mass updating existing constituents in Bloomerang. So we're going to look at a workflow where if a transaction is received greater than $1,000, we're going to add a constituent to a spreadsheet. And from that spreadsheet, we're going to assign a solicitor and a prospect status. So we're basically going to think about this as like a major gift workflow. So someone gives a $1,000 donation, we're going to write them to the sheet. When they're in the sheet, they're not going to have a solicitor or prospect status. So we're going to add that to the sheet. And that's going to write back into Bloomerang the solicitor and prospect status that we've assigned. So like all of our use cases, we're going to start in our spreadsheet. You can see here I have a column here, column A called push to Bloomerang. I'll show you that in a second. We have the constituent details, and then we have the two fields that we're going to edit in the spreadsheet and write back to Bloomerang. So let's go into Zapier and take a look at how this is built. So this is actually a two-step or a two-zap flow. First, we're going to look for anyone who's given $1,000, and we're going to write them to the sheet. So this is not dissimilar than all of the other workflows we've already looked at. We're looking for a $1,000 donation. We're only going to continue if the constituent solicitor field and prospect status fields don't exist. They're blank, meaning they're unassigned. And we're going to write the constituents information to the spreadsheet. Now let's look at the next flow, which we'll go through in a little bit more detail. This flow is going to trigger on my Google Sheet. So when I make an edit in this sheet, I want my Zap to run. So my trigger event, editing the Google Sheet, is going to be set up as the first step of the Zap. So I'm going to choose Google Sheet. And in this case, I'm going to select Updated Spreadsheet Row. I'm going to choose my account. I'm going to choose which spreadsheet I want to trigger on. And I'm also going to select which column I want to trigger on. In this case, I'm going to trigger on the push to Bloomerang column. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put an X next to the rows that I want to push into Bloomerang. So you can think of this like an on-off switch. So I'm setting the trigger column again, push to Bloomerang. So when this is updated, this trigger will run. I get some sample data. You can see this is row 5 here. Row 5 is just some sample data that I can use. And then I'm going to update the constituent in Bloomerang. So I'm going to choose Bloomerang as the app, update constituent as the action. I'll authenticate. In this case, because a constituent must be updated based on the constituent's ID, this is a perfect duplicate check. I'm going to map the constituent ID that I wrote with the prior step. So this field right here, constituent ID from Bloomerang, I'm going to use that as my key to update Bloomerang. The constituent ID is not the account number. The constituent ID is an API field, so you'll have to be cognizant of that. But you'll see here, let me open this up. There is an instruction as a reminder to update constituents dynamically. Choose custom to map the ID from a find constituent step. This is our find constituent step with our ID. So we're mapping that in here as custom. From there, I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to update only two fields, the solicitor field and the prospect status field. So I'm going to map those in from my trigger here and my status field here. And then I'm ready to go. So I'm done editing. I turn on my Zap. And now, expand this a little bit, working with two windows here. So let's go to Bruce Wayne. And let's add a new donation for $2,000 to get us over that threshold. So there's our row. We just had a major gift come in for $2,000, so we've added this individual to our list. And now what I want to do is I want to assign the solicitor and prospect status to this account. So you'll notice on Bruce Wayne's account, I do not have a solicitor or prospect status. So what I'm going to do is in this sheet, I mark J as our solicitor and our prospect status is active. And then I'm just going to put an X here to push this to Bloomerang. Then we wait for that to run. And you can see when I refresh, now I have a solicitor and a prospect status assigned. So again, in summary, what we're looking at here is we're looking at the ability to have a constituent in a sheet and then enter data in the sheet to populate our Bloomerang database. So to wrap up here, and I want to make sure we have lots of time for questions. To wrap up the presentation, I'll leave you with a couple other use cases. We've talked about some other lists and directories, memberships, donor rosters, major gift pipelines. You can even set up task lists for follow-ups or action steps in a Google Sheet. If you don't use another product like Asana, or maybe you're not using Bloomerang tasks, you could use a Google Sheet for task lists. You can also use Google Sheets for a number of integration helper tools. For instance, if you want to use lookup tables in Google Sheets, you can use Google Sheets in Zapier workflows. These are some advanced things, but again, I want to leave you with just a couple of ideas as you navigate your way through Zapier and thinking about setting up integrations. One key concept. With the flexibility of Google Sheets, it could be interpreted that we're advocating for using spreadsheets to replace data entry and direct navigation with Bloomerang. And that could not be farther from the truth. Bloomerang is your central system in your technology stack. And what we want to do is we want to use integrations to supplement your Bloomerang experience, not replace it. So we've already talked about this. If you want to get started, the best way to get started with Google Sheets and Zapier is to boot up a template. Those are available on that Bloomerang integrations page. You can click try it on any of those integrations. and get them started. The best thing to do with Zapier, especially if you've never used it, is just turn one on. Just see how it works. You're not going to hurt anything because you're only entering items one at a time. Boot up an example template, turn it on, and see how it works. And that really is the best way to learn Zapier. If you'd like to get in contact with us, our email is at the bottom here. This will be in the slide deck and also the follow-up email with Diana. We've talked a little bit about this. We build Zaps and custom integrations for Bloomerang users. You can learn more about that on our website. Again, I want to be clear that Zapier is designed for everyone to design integrations. But if you do feel like you need a little support on heavier lifts, that's certainly something we can help with. So Diana, I think we could do the poll and open up for questions. And again, I'm happy to stay on as long as possible. I know you usually cut off at an hour, but I'm happy to stay on.
Yes, thank you so much, Jeff, and thank you, everyone. We have the poll up right now. If you're interested to connect your Bloomerang database with Google Sheets through Zapier, let us know. Or if there's something else that you've seen previously that you might be interested in connecting with your Bloomerang database, let us know as well so we can have a member of our team contact you and get that process started. As people are answering the polls, we have a couple of questions here, if Jeff, you don't mind.
Let's do it.
So let's say you're updating your Google Sheets and you're using an X, for example, as your trigger to push to Bloomerang. Do you need to delete that after the push? What happens if you type something else in there? Is it going to break the Zap?
Yeah, it's a good question. Usually I'm going to leave it. I'm going to leave it alone. So I'll put the X there and I'll just leave it. If you did edit this, the way we have the Zap configured, if you did edit this column, it would trigger again. However, you can get around that pretty easily. If you only wanted it to fire on that column, but with a specific word or character, you could just set a filter step to say only continue the Zap if the column reads yes. Text contains yes. So even if you change it to an X or no or hello or go, push, whatever, this Zap would not continue unless it read yes. So the trigger would still go, it would still attempt to run, but it would stop before you actually wrote anything to Bloomerang.
Wonderful, thanks, Jeff. And for the other way around, if you're pushing from Bloomerang to Google Sheets through Zapier, is there any indication on the Google Sheet that it came from a Zap, or is it safe to kind of edit that Google Sheet manually versus letting that be dedicated to Zaps from Bloomerang?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Can you merge manual data entry with data that's coming in from a Zap? So yes, so if you wanted to add a row here, let's just say we want to bring this row down. Zapier's smart enough to put the next data set in that next row. So you could add manual entry and automated entry in the same sheet. That's not a problem. If you needed to flag whether or not it came from Zapier, you could certainly add another column and put maybe the Zapier runtime, the time that the Zap ran in that column, and that would identify when that action was conducted in the sheet.
Wonderful, thank you. And also in terms of pushing data from Bloomerang to Google Sheets, how much customization can you do? For example, if you're excluding certain fields, like fair market value for events and looking at cumulative giving, is that something that can be excluded when that information gets pushed to Google Sheets?
Yeah, so I would change the lens a little bit. So you're thinking about what can I exclude from the data? And Zapier thinks the other way. What are you going to include in your data? So when you're writing to a Google Sheet from Bloomerang, let's say you're doing the recurring donation schedules, we're defining that the only data we want to write is the data that we populate in the Zap. So the transaction comes with a whole payload, a response full of data about the constituent, the transaction, potentially the household, cumulative giving history. But you'll notice we're not writing any of that to the Google Sheet. Zapier's basically dropping it, or as if you aren't using it. So if we just switch and think about what we want to include in a Google Sheet, then you have the full flexibility to decide what doesn't come through.
Awesome, thank you. We have another great question here. I know we're a little bit over, but so thank you for everyone who's still with us, and thank you, Jeff, for sticking with us.
Yep.
We have a question here. Google and other apps like Eventbrite are constantly making updates. How much do these affect Zaps already in place?
So Zapier has versioning. Updates that are being made to the apps that you're using in a Zap are not going to affect your Zaps in a significant way. You may have to update your Zaps with new conditions and assumptions based on the changes those apps make, but those are all, you're notified of those changes. So Zapier is based on versioning. Bloomerang's the same way. When we make a change to the Bloomerang Zapier app, we do a version control step. So you actually have to migrate to the new version. So I don't think changes to apps are going to significantly affect your workflows.
Wonderful, thank you. And we have a last question here. I don't know if we can go into this right now, but what are some of the limitations if you're trying to add new constituents into Bloomerang from Google Sheets?
I don't think there would be any limitation.
Right.
The big limitation that I would see would be that you would want to make sure that you use a find constituent step to ensure that the constituent does not already exist in Bloomerang, because you don't want to create duplicates.
Exactly.
So real quick, if I was running from a Google Sheet to create constituents, assume this was create constituent here, I would do a find Bloomerang step or merge the create with the find step. I'd do find constituent, and I would check against a duplicate check key, the first name, last name, street, phone, or email, to make sure that that constituent didn't exist already. And if it did exist, that would stop the Zap so you wouldn't create a duplicate constituent. So I think that's the only condition I would think about if you were running create constituents from a spreadsheet.
Wonderful point. And I know I said last question, but this is a great question that we have. Can sheets contain drop downs to limit the choices you can make to values that are already in Bloomerang? Would that affect?
Yeah, so can you do it? Yes. So yes, but you would have to make a custom call to the API. Because these sheets are assuming that you're putting data into them without validation against Bloomerang's field sets. I'm not going to get into the logistics today of how an API call could validate that. What I would recommend is, let's say this solicitor field here had a set of values. What I would do is, as you're setting up this sheet, I would just set up data validation so that you have that drop down. There's a concept called batch entry. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but on the future horizon, we can see an opportunity for potentially using Google Sheets for some batch entry, and I think that's what people are getting at. It's out there. We're thinking about it.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Jeff. It looks like those are all the questions that we have right now. And thank you to everyone again for joining us today. We're very excited for this Zapier integration, and we're very excited to see where all of you take it. Zapier has an integration with over 2,000 different apps, and we've only just scratched the surface of what you can do with Google Sheets. So we're excited to explore more options. We hope that you can find some way to better automate your processes and work better with Bloomerang through Zapier. So thank you everyone again, and have a great afternoon. Thanks, Jeff.